Let's talk about congestion, price controls, and wage differentials. It's rare to find an organ transplant after an accident. Oh no. So record this slide number and before you proceed, try to answer these questions to the best of your ability. This is a super important concept and at the core of economic thinking. You won't understand and appreciate bottom-up mechanisms unless you fully grasp price signals. And it's very simple and intuitive. It's also a good review of what is a market and how it works. Let's begin. If the price of something is relatively low, what does the law of demand say? And what does the law of supply say? So pause here and write down your answer in your notes. There will be many buyers who will be like, oh no, what happened? They're unhappy since they can't get what they want. Now, how do we fix this? The answer is competition, which is going to drive up the price. Now, as the market price goes up, what happens to the incentives of the sellers? What about the incentives of the buyers? Again, pause here and write down your guess. All you need is the law of supply and the law of demand. Buyers who don't really want it, who have lower willingness to pay, would let go until we reach the equilibrium. So that's one side. What about when the price is relatively high? So for these dots, you need to be able to fill it yourself. Make sure you have complete notes, and you should have as much as what is on the left side for when the price is relatively high. Come on, it's easy and it helps your learning. Jeez. The moral of the story is that the market price conveys valuable information to the buyers and sellers about the scarcity or abundance of something. It's the best incentive to modify their behavior in a way that maximizes efficiency, which means greatest social utility for everyone. And that is the invisible hand of Adam Smith. That's so cool. That is how the market allocates scarce resources efficiently. And for this magic to work, prices should be fluid, not fixed. And newcomers should be welcome in the market. So that is called a free competitive market. I would emphasize in all this the idea of prices as a signal and as a piece of information. You might want to watch this slide again, it's super important, and make sure your notes are complete. A few definitions. We looked at price signals. Let's look at efficiency. It's when something is produced with the least sacrifice, is consumed by the ones with the highest willingness to pay, and without any shortage or surplus. All right, make sure you write down these three conditions and try to use your own words or write a counter example for each to better absorb it. Now, to find the efficient outcome, we need to know all the costs and all the preferences of the people. But no one has such omniscience. That's the main flaw of socialism and why those systems failed so miserably, because it expects the government, a centralized authority, to have all this information. The knowledge is dispersed among millions of buyers and sellers. And that's why we need a market, to let that information surface and let the resources be distributed efficiently. So are we out of luck? No, there is a solution which actually works. All it takes is a bit of patience and the ability to let go. Not to assume that people are babies who have to be taken care of. Not to give too much role to the government who doesn't have the required information. Pause here. Thousands of people die every year waiting for a kidney transplant, a shortage of voluntary donors. The same is true about liver and heart. There is a shortage of space on roads. In many countries, there are a lot of applicants for adoption, but the adoption is very inefficient and full of corruption, and it doesn't go through. So much water is wasted in the farms, and so much garbage is being produced out there. So you might be like, what a mess, what's going on here? In all these cases, we are dealing with a fixed flat price imposed by the government top down. And when the price of anything is kept low, there will be a shortage. Duh. And then they're managed through a number of ways, which include a long list of waiting, a strict quota system, or an illegal market underground. And all of these effectively mean a higher price in the form of higher opportunity cost for the buyers. So the law of demand is still very much at work, but in a very inefficient and painful way. The free health quote-unquote free healthcare system in Canada is another good example of a shortage due to artificially low price. Just go to the emergency room once and you'll learn the hard way that there is no free lunch. We are paying a high price for our quote-unquote free healthcare. Congratulations, what an achievement. So pause here and take notes on some of these examples and maybe write your own. Having water is a basic human right. It's inhumane to buy and sell organs. Everyone should have access to roads and transportation. What do you think about these statements? Do you agree, disagree, maybe, a qualified answer? These are very appealing on the surface, but quite ignorant of the fact and ultimately flawed. You can think of similar statements about babies and garbage collection. It's this kind of mentality which results in all the shortage and inefficiency that we saw in the last slide. The fact is, none of these value judgments change the reality of scarcity. I don't know how many times I've emphasized this. Sorry for being repetitive, but it's quite a crucial sensitivity that's so missing from public discourse. These are noble objectives, but they can't replace the facts on the ground. Here's another question. Is it wrong to commodify human beings? The answer is, it's not about being right or wrong. We are all literally commodifying ourselves every day, and there is no other alternative. We already saw how we put a price on our life whenever we eat or drink or go on the road. And what's the alternative? Millions of people suffering and dying because no one has the incentive to donate an organ? If human life is valuable, then a market for organs is a lot more humane than relying only on donations. The problem, once again, is a fixed flat price. And the solution is real-time or variable pricing, which means the prices are responsive to peak hours. Listen carefully. The best way to deal with scarcity is a market because of the power of price signals. And in terms of organs, there is one country where there is a market for kidneys, that's Iran. And they've got rid of the shortage problem. It's been quite a success there. It's probably the only thing they got right. Here's a good example. Think of toll roads which vary during rush hours. So you can see up here the prices can be changed according to congestion. This makes people pay for the traffic and pollution externality that they create. And remember the law of demand? It gives them the incentive to not overcrowd the roads when the price is high. Another example is electricity in summer, when everyone turns on their AC and overload the system. So that would be another form of congestion. Too much demand on the grid. The solution is simple and it has been tried and verified. Let the price vary during the day according to the availability of the resource. And of course, this should be communicated to the consumers so they can make informed decisions. And nowadays, with the new technologies, it's very easy and low cost to do so. One who uses a service should pay for it. Duh! Because if the user doesn't pay for it, then someone else must pay for it. There is no free lunch. Wow, that's cool. So there's going to be a shortage unless the prices are allowed to change and we have a dynamic system of pricing. And that's what I want to emphasize in this slide. So pause here and take notes. Did you see that? It was crushed. The opposite of a flexible price is a price control, which is when the government imposes a restriction on the price of something, top down. And it comes in two forms, price ceiling and price floor. Now that should be quite intuitive. A ceiling is above your head. It's an upper bound. The floor is a lower limit. You can't go below. Now, what do you think is the logic for having a price ceiling? Remember, a high price is good for the sellers, bad for the buyers. So setting an upper limit is meant to help the buyers not be abused. And it would be applied to essentials. What about price floor? What is the purpose for it? That is used when the sellers are deemed to be weak, in a disadvantaged position, and without bargaining power. And the best example for it is the minimum wage, which is the price of labor, and the sellers of labor are the workers. Now watch out. These are only the proclaimed objectives, not the actual results. It's not enough to have good intentions. As an economist, you must be sensitive about how they're executed and their consequences. Sometimes the road to hell is good intentions, right? So take notes and write your own example of something that would deserve a price ceiling in your opinion and something that may deserve a price floor in your opinion. I really want you to understand the logic behind price controls. Imagine a pharmaceutical drug and initially without any government restriction, the market price is 100. Basically, the price can go as high or as low as it may, depending on the willingness to pay of buyers and the cost of the sellers, depending on its scarcity. The government then comes in and says, hang on, this is a matter of life and death. Everyone must have access to it. So they set a price ceiling, an upper limit on the price. So the price will drop, but this is not due to market forces. It's artificially imposed by the government. Now, what does the law of demand tell you? When the price falls, what happens to the number of buyers? And what does the law of supply tell you? What happens to the number of sellers? So that's cool. We can predict that there's going to be more buyers and fewer sellers. And what is that called? When there are a lot of buyers, not enough sellers, it's called a shortage, right? So the sellers will lose the incentive to offer at this price. Notice that the policy had noble objectives, but it defeats its purpose. It was meant for everyone to have access to the drug, but we get lower production because we didn't anticipate and we didn't respect the incentives of rational decision makers. You see the same problem with the shortage of doctors and nurses in Quebec, with long waiting lists to get an operation. A shortage is the unintended consequence of any price ceiling. Take notes. Take minimum wage as a price floor. Before any government restriction, the market price can be anywhere. Oh no, that's scary. Let's say it's going to be $10. Then the government comes in and says, hang on, workers shouldn't be exploited, so they must be paid at least $15 an hour, which by the way is completely arbitrary. Why not 20? Why not 50? Who's to decide? And that's the problem with paternalism, no objective criterion. A couple of reminders here. Workers are the sellers of labor, and minimum wage is a lower bound on the price of labor. So the price is going to increase, but again, it's an artificial imposition top-down. So what's going to be the incentives of the employers for the demanders of labor? And what happens to the number of people who are willing to offer their work? So fill in the blanks when you take notes and make sure they're complete. All you need to do is to use the law of demand and the law of supply. The net effect will be a surplus. And a surplus of labor means that many workers like to offer their service, but there aren't many employers to hire them. And that's called unemployment. That was cool. Oh, geez. Congratulations. Yeah, you got unemployment out of nowhere. So the idea is that the government coercion results in fewer jobs, which defeats its purpose. So this kid is kind of like, what have you done? Now, here's the thing. If we're in the normative judgmental mode, we can point the finger at the evil employers and call them ruthless and inconsiderate. But if we look at it rationally and objectively, they're actually being very considerate. After all, they're a business, not a charity. They too are struggling to survive and make ends meet. They're simply responding to incentives in the most rational way. The problem is that the government has distorted the incentives by fixing the price. And the solution is very simple. Remove price controls. Because once the buyers and sellers are free to interact, price signals will sort out the shortages and surpluses. Take notes. Wow, that was cool. Minimum wage reduces the freedom of contract of workers. What if someone is content with $10 an hour? They can't be hired at that price legally, which creates an underground economy of people working for cash. Firms have to pay more in costs, which means the price of end products for consumers will rise. It's like a flow-through tax, and most consumers of what is made with minimum wage are the very poor who were supposed to be helped. What a mess. It's an additional hurdle which creates rigidity in the labor market. When there are not enough positions, the more privileged are likely to land them at the expense of others. The worker's service has a certain value based on their skills and productivity, but the employers are forced to pay a premium on top of that. So from their perspective, they're paying for nothing. They're not receiving any service for that additional pay. So they're going to retaliate and pass on the costs to the workers as much as they can. And they can do it because they have more bargaining power since there are so many applicants. So they can discriminate and pick and choose. And this hurts the most those who want and need to climb up, like racial minorities, single mothers, and immigrants. It's really devastating to see how all that good intention turns on its head so dramatically. It reduces the effectiveness of the system since it's no longer governed by productivity but by favoritism and power dynamics. Pause here and summarize it in one sentence. The victims of minimum wage are the most vulnerable people, those who need to accumulate human capital and gain work experience. In the US, the black unemployment rate, especially for teenagers, skyrocketed after the minimum wage laws of 1950s and 60s. That's how it defeats its purpose. Now, to be fair, minimum wage does have some benefits. There are those who keep their jobs and they're the ones who benefit from it. But something that's kind of important is to see who pushes for it the most. So the greatest proponents of that are labor unions, who are usually professionals and people who work above minimum wage. So what is their stake at this? Well, they get to have more bargaining power and they'll limit their competition this way. So it's really a pacifier, it's a distraction, it has political benefits, and it's lobbied by powerful organizations whose voices are heard more as opposed to the victims. Take notes. Why do wages differ? How come some people make more than others? The answer is simple. It's no different from any other price. Which one is more expensive, chicken leg or chicken breast per pound? Chicken breast. What about apples versus cherries? Cherries. What about the salary of a pilot versus a bus driver? A pilot makes more. What about rent in downtown versus the suburbs? And take Toronto, where the real estate market is more vibrant. Per unit, downtown is more expensive. All these prices are determined by the market according to the abundance or scarcity of a resource. The price goes up when there is a shortage of something, which can be caused by either low supply or high demand or both. So in the case of chicken, there is equal supply since each chicken has an equal share of whatever. What a mess. But breasts are more in demand because they're boneless, lazy consumers. And for the pilot versus the bus driver, there is high demand for bus drivers, for sure. However, there is also a lot of bus drivers out there, so there is also high supply. But pilots are fewer in supply since it takes more training. Anyway, whenever something is more popular or harder to make, it will have a higher price, and wages follow the same rule. There were some nice animations on this slide. Aren't you impressed? Workers with equal qualifications should have equal earnings. That sounds like a harmless statement, but it is a fallacy. The wage, like any other price, is a signal. It indicates how much economic value a worker is anticipated to generate. The determining factor in one's wage is not one's qualifications, but one's expected profitability. This is a major explanation for the wage differentials between sexes and races. If two groups have the same chance of career interruption because of having a baby or taking care of an aged relative or because of incarceration, then they should have the same salary on average. But as long as the rates are not the same, we cannot expect the salaries to be the same. Remember, hiring and interviews are very costly, and an employer would naturally want to know that their employee will be there. This is less likely for female applicants because there is always a possibility of getting pregnant and having to stop. And also for older women, because they're also more likely than men to stop because of other family commitments. Even if a woman can't become pregnant or chooses not to, it doesn't matter, because from the employer's perspective, from the labor market's perspective, it doesn't change the expected value calculations. And this is all because of our biological difference. The way we reproduce as a species takes a lot more investment from the mother than the father, and this takes its toll on the women's ability to be competitive in the labor market. There is no free lunch. Now you might be like, hang on, what about patriarchy, sexual discrimination, and religious oppression? Yes, these can all be relevant, but they're secondary. Even in the absence of all these factors, we are still not on level ground because of the reproductive element, which is very significant. So if you want to blame anyone, blame God or nature, because this is something purely biological. That's what it comes down to. This lady wants to climb up the ladder to tell God, what have you done? But she can't because she's on the mummy track. What a mess. This is also why there are fewer women in managerial positions like CEOs, because these promotions require consistent job retention. And this is a double-edged sword because those men who rise so high are also sacrificing something of very high value. Their time is also limited. They're sacrificing their family for their work. Either way, there's a loss. So maybe we shouldn't be so upset about it. Who said one sacrifice is more valuable than the other? Why do we only care about monetary compensation and not family compensation? Why do we assume that everyone must have the same occupational achievement or even the same occupational opportunity Maybe that's not a realistic expectation. Maybe you are being too ambitious with our ideals of equality. What do you think? I'd love to hear your opinion and your pushback. This slide offers a solid alternative to the common normative rhetoric of systemic discrimination. Pay special attention to this definition in a perceived sense. You've seen this before, and it deserves even more attention. Human capital is arguably the deepest root cause of a person's success, and it's quite broad. It's the accumulation of investment in someone, which in turn makes them more skilled. You could say that human capital is the same as one's skill set, and that makes them more productive. You might want to write this down. Productivity is the rate of output per unit of input, like output per hour, or the dollars one generates per hour. It's not total output, but the rate of production. Part of human capital is natural and part of it is acquired. Notice that health can come from both. So if you think of these examples, they're skilled because of their hereditary qualities and they have developed them further. So one's wage depends on one's level of productivity, how much revenue they can generate. So people differ in wage partly because they differ in human capital, and that is called meritocracy, where ability and merit determines one's status, not race or connections. You already know that formal education can serve as a signal. So a college degree doesn't necessarily mean the person is more productive, but it is a sign of the person's ability to achieve. They pulled through 4 years of a program, and that's meaningful. Take notes. Wow, that was cool. Other things being equal, the unpleasantness of a job can qualify one for a wage premium as a compensation. And this gain is because of scarcity. Certain jobs don't have many applicants since they are not pretty for exposing oneself to danger or dirt. This is also a major explanation for the gender wage gap. Men are more likely to hold these kinds of jobs. Labor studies show that women tend to favor a flexible schedule much more than men. And this shouldn't be a surprise given their maternity consideration. Even as professionals, women tend to specialize more in occupations where work experience has little to do with their status. But rising up the corporate ladder often requires significant dedication to one's career at the expense of one's family. Either way, one makes the trade-off and meets its consequences. So that can explain why there are fewer women in top managerial positions. There is one more example here, which is kind of cool, and it's really true about professors versus lawyers and doctors. And here's the funny quote from an oh, that's cool. Here's a funny quote from an economics textbook for you. So take notes. How come a professional athlete or singer can make more money than the best tailor, hairdresser, or even surgeon? That's because the first dudes can serve numerous consumers simultaneously at a low cost. The nature of their service is non-rival, so their sales can grow exponentially. Millions of people can watch Connor McDavid or listen to Justin Bieber at once, but the best hairdresser, plumber, or surgeon can at most serve one person at once. So the service of the second group is rival, and this is called the superstar phenomenon. Porn stars are like that too, and that's why they're called stars, quote unquote. Otherwise, they're not stars in being role models or anything. Our utility is a function of two things, what we have and what we expect. And they work in opposite directions in affecting our satisfaction. Economics is only concerned with trying to maximize what we have. But if you're smart enough, you'd realize that much of what we have is beyond our control, but we are fully in charge of our expectations. And that's the Stoic key to happiness. Expect less. This was a great discovery of Stoic philosophers in ancient Greece, which is almost the same as the Buddha's message. Now you can see in some developing countries you'll find people who are really happy even though they don't have much, and they're not faking it. And you can see why. Sometimes they have racial divisions or sexual subjugations, and yet their second-class citizens are happier than most of us in the West. It's because utility is a relative concept. It's relational. Another example are kids of affluent families. They have everything, but they're often not happy. It's natural and inevitable to compare ourselves. The question is to whom? To those above us or to those below us? The key to happiness is enjoying what we have instead of complaining about what we don't. So that was a little excursion beyond economics. And that's the end of today's lesson. See how you would answer these questions based on what you learned today. So record the slide number and the question numbers and write your answers in your notes. All right, let's summarize. Price controls can come in the form of a price ceiling, which leads to a shortage, or in the form of a price floor, which leads to a surplus. The alternative to price controls are price signals, which are based on productivity and competition. An example of that would be real-time pricing, which leads to efficiency. When price signals are applied to wages, then those wages would be based on compensating differentials, human capital, freedom of contract, and the superstar phenomenon. Don't you love my concept maps? Now, you've seen some of these concepts before, and you might see them again exactly because they are so important. In this lesson, I would emphasize price signals as well as real-time pricing, which are super important in understanding how congestion is managed in a market. So pause here, do your own concept map. There are a bunch of other concepts which are missing here. Maybe you could add them. So make sure it is unique to you. How would you answer the original scenario now? At this point, you should be able to provide an advanced analysis like a professional economist. So take a couple of minutes, record the slide number, and answer the guiding questions based on today's lesson. A sample response is that the incentive here is that we're dealing with the problem of shortage because of low marginal benefit. The government may use rationing and a waiting list. That will likely create suffering and dying because of the shortage and possibly a black market. An alternative to that is to realize that the organ price is not zero since people are paying for it not through dollars. There is an opportunity cost, and that if there is a market for organs, that can resolve the problem of shortage. Have a great day.